Welcome to Mortgage Giants. I'm tall, he's taller.
I'm taller.
Let's talk mortgages. All right, so I want to start this one off with a theme that I've been seeing pop up on social media of people telling the camera that they're feeling pressured to buy a home. Like everybody's telling you have to get into home ownership, and now they're feeling stressed that they can't. And I feel like there's a discussion to be had of like, if you don't want to get into home ownership, you don't have to. But if you do, then let's work towards it. But if you're not going to, then make sure that you're doing something else. Because while home ownership might not be considered an investment to some because you're staying there, in the long term, it will give you something that you can use way down. Like if you pay off this mortgage in 25 years and now you're sitting on a home, even if it's worth a little bit less, you still have something. So if you're not going to get into home ownership, make sure that you're doing steps to invest elsewhere, but don't just get into it just because you're pressured.
Yeah. Well, I think that a part of our culture and as Canadians is it's high school, college, get a job, buy a house.
Right.
It's pretty linear. I think that maybe that's been around for a long time. And yeah, I mean, obviously I think that real estate is a worthy investment, and paying rent is less than ideal for a lot of people, but there are a lot of markets right now where rent might make more sense. So like, to say the pressure of home ownership, like, do you think that people like are insecure or feel like less successful if they don't own a house?
I think there's a part of that.
Yeah, and I mean, that's unfortunate if people feel that pressure, but they could also, as long as they're feeling like they've made that decision, that conscious decision to invest for their future in other assets, just through TFSAs or investment accounts that support their future retirement goals, and if they've done their due diligence and feel like there's other avenues to achieve their retirement goals, that they shouldn't feel that negative emotion around home ownership. But I will say this about, like, there are benefits to being in a home that you own and paying down a mortgage, even at higher rates. The first 5 years are, you're making a smaller dent in the principal than in year, let's say 15 to 10. But you are contributing to something long-term that, ideally future you will thank yourself for. And if you're buying in a relevant community that is experiencing even 1% annual appreciation, I mean, you will have an asset at the end of the day. And ideally that asset has grown to a point where you can sell it and downsize. That's not always the guarantee. Like, I do know a lot of boomers now, they live in their what was maybe a starter home in Alberta that is maybe now going on the market for $400,000. It is hard for them to find a condo or something to downsize into for $400,000 or less.
That suits their needs.
Because they probably still want the garage space, the hobby shop. So yeah, to bank on the downsizing, cashing in equity, and then living, with those dollars in retirement isn't something I would advise either. But you get to the point where you can sell that asset and then get into a rental or long-term care facility and have, $400,000 to support your care needs at a later date. If you don't have that asset, you really make sure you're saving.
But it's almost like there's a general consensus of, like, you paying for a primary residence and paying down the mortgage, you're not getting anything out of it. Like, I don't know, but there are certain influencers out there who talk about, like, it's all about investment properties, it has to make you money, a primary only costs you money. Well, yes, it costs you money, but you're living there, you have your own space, and there's certain luxuries that come with that. There's certain stresses that get removed.
Sure there are.
When you have your own space. And like you say, at the end of the day, now you have an asset.
Yeah. Yeah, those same influencers, those same people who are so fixated on buying and selling and flipping and, you know, well, you're displacing a family every time you want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So you're causing the uncertainty that maybe you're talking about.
Right.
You know, like you want to, like, what's the price tag if you've earned an appreciation of $50,000 on a property, $100,000 on a property? Do you then now sell it, deal with those real estate commissions?
Mm-hmm.
You know, the cost of selling is significant.
Yeah.
So you got to factor all that in. But for a family that wants and needs a place to live and wants to live there for a significant amount of time, yeah, like you absolutely come out, you know, I think ahead.
Yeah.
With an asset, and yeah, the security of not displacing your family at a landlord's request.
Right. Yeah.
So,
and on the flip side of, like, you don't have to do that though. Like, if you're feeling pressured, just because that might be the linear growth that has been in place for decades, doesn't mean that that has to be what it is for you.
No, for sure. But it's just, you know, we talk about even people who are committed to the home buying path.
Mm-hmm.
And we talk about prepayment privileges and accelerated biweekly payments and monthly payments. Are you a person that is a saver?
Yeah.
And can say, oh, okay, my mortgage is X.
Mm-hmm.
I can afford Y.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say your mortgage payment is $3,000. You can afford $3,600.
Yeah.
So should you shorten that amortization to create a $3,600 a month payment? Or should we just set the amortization started at 20, 25 years, make the payment comfortable, $3,000, and then are you going to put that extra $600 into a rainy day fund?
Yeah.
Set it aside, and every 6 months, every 4 months, if the furnace doesn't break, if you don't need a new lawnmower, you know, if that account is still intact, apply it to the mortgage.
Right.
If you do that, you will effectively accomplish the same thing.
Yeah.
And you've created a little bit of a reserve fund. I love that.
Yeah.
But if a person can, you know, self-reflect and say, no, like every time there's $3,500 in there, like I'll probably go on a trip. I'll probably go buy something, new golf clubs, like whatever it may be. That person, yeah, maybe we should consider shortening the amortization and making that payment $3,600 because they really do want to be mortgage free.
Yeah.
So are you a saver and are diligent, or are you a little bit of a, you know, I might spend that money kind of person? It could be the same thing when debating home ownership versus investing.
Yeah.
Do you need to create that asset to help you have something in 20 years to fall back on? Or are you going to be diligent and can you commit, you know, to meet some retirement goals just through, you know, investing?
Yeah.
So it's kind of that question. It's a personality thing, and some people like change.
Yeah.
Like some people could say, like, oh, I don't know if I want to live in that neighborhood. I don't know if I want to live in that city.
Yeah.
I like the flexibility of renting. That makes sense. You know, that totally makes sense to remain renting and don't be apologetic for it.
Right. Yeah. Like this whole process should not just be you have to do it because they did it. Like it's got to apply to you, whether that's no home and renting or buying a home. And then once we even get into the mortgage details, you apply it to you. Like you said, shorten amortization, and like there's strategy involved, and you got to look inward and make sure that it is lining up with who you are and what your goals are, future plans.
Yeah. Man, that person needs new friends. Like that person really needs new friends.
Right.
Maybe new, like if it's coming from family pressure.
It could be coming from older parents.
Well, that's like, great, give me $500,000.
Yeah.
I'd love to buy a house with your money, no problem. But like if you're like, other than that, I mean, you shouldn't be feeling that kind of negativity.
Right.
You know, from your circle of people. I'd be shopping for new friends, not a house.
Yeah. And I guess it doesn't help that so much of what's out there is nothing but bad news.
Yeah, sure.
Around rates and increased prices.
Yeah.
But the thing to remember with that too is that's generally related to specific areas. Like, yes, rates are high, but like
Yeah.
We're not seeing the price increases that Toronto is seeing or Vancouver is seeing, even Calgary a little bit, but
Calgary, yeah, a lot, yeah, for sure. So yeah, there's benefits to buying. I'll said it before, I'll say it again. I mean, there are benefits to buy when prices are a little high.
Yeah.
Or sorry, rates are a little high.
Yeah, and prices are a little bit lower. Yeah.
You're removing competition.
Yeah.
It's the interest rate is gonna, yes, you will pay a little bit more in interest when rates are higher, but if you're gonna save $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 on the purchase price.
Yeah. The other thing you got to remember is, like, if you are going the length with this mortgage, whether that's 25-year or 30-year, if we're looking at a 5-year, that's like 1/5 or 1/6 the life of your mortgage.
Yeah.
Like, what if the next 10 years after this 5-year term are lower?
Yeah.
What if the next 15 years are lower? Like, to look at this first 5-year period and say no just because of that,
yeah,
it seems a little crazy. But if you can get into homeownership and you want to get into homeownership, don't avoid it just because rates are high right now.
For sure. You get the lovely email that comes in, right? It says, when are rates going to be 3.5% again? Yeah. Period. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe never.
Not anytime soon, that's for sure.
Maybe 3 years.
Yeah.
You know, maybe, and it's like, why? Why are you asking me that question?
Yeah.
You know, is it because you have a renewal and you're trying to sync up, you know, maybe just taking a 1-year term or 2-year term because you think rates are going to drop significantly within a 48, 72 month span, whatever, or are you buying and you're on the sidelines?
Yeah.
You know, so what's that question about? And then again, rental rates are creeping up.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the rental market will always drive purchase market because rates creep up.
Mm-hmm.
Your lease is up and you're like, I don't want to pay that rental amount, so I'm going to start looking again.
Yeah.
So there's a lag. You know, rates go up and then rents follow.
Yeah.
And then there's that tipping point again where your rent is higher than what a mortgage will be.
Right.
So that doesn't matter what the rate is. It's what you're paying to live. And do you want to pay a mortgage or do you want to pay a landlord?
Right.
You know, so just it's not a rate question. It's a cost of living question.
Yeah.
The rate will push people to the sidelines and some people will remain there.
Right.
But they need to do a little bit more analysis.
Yeah.
You know, to figure out what they want.
Yeah. Yeah. Because if you can afford it, because there's a different question than affordability. Like, if you can't afford the home that you need, then you might have to wait a little bit longer, or you take a cut on what you're looking for to get in. But if you can afford what you need, then don't let rate be the determining factor.
The saying in, like, those densely populated areas, it really is the drive to qualify.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you just keep going until you find a community that is in the price range that fits the budget.
Yeah.
If it's too far, and the cost of gas and the quality of life and the time behind the wheel each day, if it's too much, then you've answered your question.
Yeah.
It's just like, I want to rent for a little while longer, or move back in with family for a little while, save more down payment. Yeah. You know.
Yeah. There's even a discussion to be had that taking a higher rate in certain situations right now makes sense, because I don't know what you've seen or heard from clients, but lots of them feel like rates are going to turn around in 2 or 3 years.
Oh yeah.
And so taking a shorter term to try and time that makes sense for a lot of people, but you're taking a higher rate to do so because the shorter term always comes with the higher rate, but that makes sense. So it shouldn't be the lowest rate is what I have to get. Yep. Because if you feel like rates are going to get better in 3 years and you're going for a 3-year rate, you're going to have a higher rate than the 5-year rate.
Yeah.
So,
like how much higher? I think about 0.75%.
I would say,
higher. And I think it's between a 2-year and like a 5-year. So it's a simple calculation. Mm-hmm. You know, and I do this for the clients that are having this dilemma, which is basically all of them. You know, so I'm doing this a lot. It's not that hard to provide the math to back this decision up. So you take the mortgage amount at the higher rate and run it for 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Find out what that balance is in 2 years. And then we take that and look for, we keep the same amortization. So let's say now we're at 23 years remaining.
Yep.
And then I can just punch in the interest rate for 3 years.
Yep.
To match up the remaining balance, to find what would have been the original if the person just went with that 5-year fixed rate. That's easy to find out what that remaining balance is at 5 years. So now I'm just blending what a 2-year term and then a 3-year term and finding that matching balance.
Yep.
And it's just play with that interest rate, find out what it needs to be in 24 months for that outcome to be the same.
Yeah.
And then it's like, do you think that rates in 2 years will be X?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's reasonable, sometimes it is not reasonable.
Right.
And somebody's like, no, I do not think that rates will be 3.89% in 2 years.
Yeah.
Maybe 4.5 was where I was hoping you would tell me it needed to be. But because you're saying it needs to be 3.89, 3.79, I'm just going to lock in the 5-year, not worry about it. I don't want to play that game.
Yeah.
And move on. It is a risk because there's a lot that can happen in 2 years. You know, the global economics, we're all connected. Like, it's not just what goes on between our borders.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of variables, and it's just, what do you want to do? But you should always do the math. You should find somebody that's willing to do the math for you and help you make that decision.
Yeah.
It's emotional, but it's also mathematical.
Well, it has to be. It can't all be one or the other.
Yeah.
There's elements of both in it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, for sure. Like, have that conversation with a client of yours as an engineer, and have that same conversation with a person that owns a health food store, or that's in a caregiving role. Yeah. You know, or something like it's just we process information differently. We put weight on information differently. Yeah. So you could provide 2 people with the same data, and they will arrive at a different conclusion. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So all we can do is provide as much information as possible, and hopefully that gives people the peace of mind to say, I can't control the future, but I did my best today. Yes. I reviewed what information was available and made the decision. Yeah.
And sometimes it might not work out because things happen. But that doesn't mean that you made the wrong decision at that time based off of all these other factors that you came to the right decision on. Mm-hmm. I had, just throw a curveball at you, an analogy that nobody asked for but pops up, and it has to do with like capitalizing versus timing. Okay. So it feels like so many people are trying to capitalize on the best rate versus trying to time it out or like play it out how it should be, where they're just taking a 5-year rate, and then if rates get better in 3 years, like, I need that now, right? Versus trying to figure out what is going to work the best for them. And this analogy that I came up with, and maybe it's broken, maybe it doesn't work, but being in the 5-year fixed rate and trying to capitalize on rates is like being on contract to eat a box of Oreos before bed each night. And every morning you're stepping on the scale to see how the weight loss progress is going. Even if you see a number you don't like, you're probably not going to be able to do anything about it because you're already locked in. No?
That's not fair because I eat a lot of cookies. It's like,
it's a broken analogy, but I just feel like there's a discussion to be had on timing versus who cares, and I'll try and capitalize whenever things get better.
Yeah, I've heard other even mortgage brokers, they just redo their mortgage every year.
Just do 1-year term after 1-year term?
Just 1 year after 1 year after 1 year, and they're in a constant, like just take it where it is, and they think that they might work out. Yeah. So I think there's other factors as to why they might do that. Yeah. But yeah, I don't know, that analogy is, I'll think on that one.
I just threw it out there. Like, just the idea that, like, I have to capitalize. Something came my way, I have to capitalize. Not necessarily thinking on anything that's coming their way, or like, maybe you're not going to be in this home for 5 years, or I don't know. There's just other factors. I don't like the idea of trying to capitalize. I like the idea of trying to strategize in time.
Yeah, that's better. Okay, I get you now. That makes a lot more sense. That is, I think, a growing problem, and I think it's going to get worse because we are all so, like, our attention spans have shrunk. Like, just the way, everything from the news cycles to TikTok reels to like the doom scrolling, like it is creating some larger problems in the way we process planning aspect.
Yeah.
Like it's shortened that. Like now we're not looking at 10-year horizons, we're looking at 3-year horizons. And like if we're in a good situation and we could be totally content, not knowing that we don't need a change, but you're right, something triggers an emotional response in us and we need to act on that, and we will basically sacrifice the old plan, throw it out, new plan, and we can just shift probably too quickly. You know, like these are big decisions, and I mean this was even, I don't even know what the data is today, but I'm thinking even from 4 years ago, like 6 in 10 families will break a 5-year term mortgage.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Like that's over 50% of people took a 5-year term because this is home, I'm not going anywhere, we love it here, and over half of them make that change. That's old data.
Yeah.
So, and that's for positive things. It can be promotions at work, transfers, new kids, upsizing, need more space, but then there's also job loss, divorce, you know, tons of things that cause. So it's not all bad, and it's sometimes it's often good, but a break is required. So 5-year terms are always and still have been the most popular term in the face of that data. So, and I think those numbers are going to go up because we are more inclined to chase new shiny things, and if interest rates get better, all of a sudden, people will act or react to an outside source telling them that maybe there's an opportunity here that I want to take advantage of, and it may or may not work out the way they want it to, and
it just I just don't get the idea of like you take this just because everybody else takes this.
So it's maybe a bigger problem maybe with just our own insecurities, that we feel that constant need to keep up and make changes when we maybe don't need it or don't want it. So, you know, I think there's a lot, unfortunately, mistakes in this business are costly. It's just buying and selling real estate is, you know, relatively expensive. And yes, you can make fantastic money in doing it. Like that's always the thing. It's the real estate carrot is always there because of frickin' HGTV, man. Like it's on our it's in our house, constantly, you know, and they're always making 6 figures. Like it's easy.
They make it look easy.
It's easy. Have you seen what a slat wall does for values? Holy shit. You know. So we're also watching TV that is, you know, maybe a little bit it's reality TV, but so that has to be leading into this too, where people are okay with making those big decisions and changes because they see this, you know, upside. You know, we can do this, make a bunch of money. But that's not always the case. You know, really isn't. So
strategy over capitalizing.
Well, and I think that the government is stepping in. There's going to be some changes coming that are going to make it way harder for rental purchases to happen. So I think they're going to try to make home ownership more accessible for people that need to use it for owner-occupied purposes. And if you remove the rental investor market, theoretically, that should open up access. But they're also going to make it harder for those homeowners, those owner-occupied users, to buy a house. I think that there's some changes coming this fall that are it's gonna make it harder to qualify. So there might be some more accessibility to properties. Maybe the amount of listings might be more conducive for owner-occupied purchases, but those buyers are going to have to be well qualified. Changes that are the rumors and things that might happen is just more of the debt servicing of limits.
Oh yeah.
On credit cards and lines of credit. Just to say, okay, well, yeah, if you have several unused lines of credit, 10,000 here, 15,000 here, 20,000 there, you don't use it, they'll even start to debt service that as if you were to use that. Like looking at it as saying, well, there's nothing stopping them from going in there tomorrow and withdrawing $50,000 of.
As soon as the mortgage closes.
Sure.
Yeah.
So there might start factoring that in to debt service all limits, which will dramatically reduce. So what banks will do and what clients will end up doing is actually closing those products. They'll be forced to close and drop limits. Like we all need credit cards, we all need lines of credit. So how they're going to factor that in? But they could say, well, you have to take that down from 20,000 to 5,000.
Yeah. Which is all, like playing around with all of that is also going to impact credit scores now.
Sure. Yeah. Right. That is all possible.
Closing counts. Yeah. Credit gets affected. Limit gets dropped. Credit could get affected.
Yeah. So you hope Equifax, TransUnion keep up with that.
Right.
And I don't know what they're going to do, but maybe if they have limits, but then you have enough liquid to offset. Yeah. Maybe they'll be like, you're less likely to use it. Yeah. Like, why would they use it if they have it available in liquid assets here? So I hope they have the foresight to do that, you know, in some way, and not just say, well, we're debt servicing everything at limit and not balance. Yeah. Without any type of, you know, mitigation and risk profile to say how likely are people to use this. Right. But don't know. Interesting. Yeah, that'll be a fall decision by OFC, I believe. So we're going to see potentially, like when the stress test came in 2016, there was a massive rush of people trying to get in, get pre-qualified, and buy before these new rules take effect. Once we get more details on that,
it'll probably go again.
That could trigger another rush this fall. So that'll be interesting to see, and something we're going to have to keep an eye on. I'm all for stress testing. I'm all for insulating people, because and the banks don't want your house. I don't know if we've talked about that yet. No. Like, the banks do not want your house. They do not want to foreclose on you. They want you to pay your mortgage and have a happy, healthy life in that home. The cost of foreclosing on somebody, because the second a house goes into foreclosure too, I mean, you may as well knock 20% off the retail price. So the bank, you know, doesn't want to do that, because then that limits the amount of cash they could potentially get from the sale to recoup not just only the mortgage, but the legal costs, the realtor costs, you know, all of that adds up. So no, they do not want your house. Yeah. And by adding new regulations, you know, it is to protect people, protect themselves, you know, as well. But I don't like that. Again, we're looking at adding more regulations to remove people from the buying pool, right? To slow down maybe the pricing of houses, instead of other departments of government focusing on the promotion of development. Yeah. You know, like green lighting, you know, like 50,000 houses across, you know, the country. You know, like, remove that red tape. Right. Like,
apparently Calgary's doing some zoning possibility stuff of opening up a whole bunch of land that is previously not zoned for townhouses and all of that.
Yeah, that's getting some pretty cool federal, national attention. So that's great. Maybe other cities will follow suit, and the municipalities, you know, and their permitting and zoning departments will really be able to, you know, approve some stuff. The other thing that, when we talk about people, and there's also a lot of people that are saying, I hope rates go up. I think that prices need to come down. This is out of control, and I don't care what happens to anybody else but me and my dreams of home ownership. Well, the problem is that we also have boomers and elderly people that have their mortgages and their homes, and that's where their retirement plans lay, is in the values of their homes. Now you want to take away, you feel like their home should depreciate in value and rob them of equity that they've been planning on and watching grow steadily. Like, I'm not going to talk about the big booms and bust years, but like, a nice gradual appreciation in home value. You think that should tank, and that person shouldn't be able to sell an asset that they've worked hard on maintaining and paying down, and you want to take that away? That's an anarchist. Like, that's a let the world burn and let me be here, ready.
Yeah.
And waiting. So I have problems with those types of viewpoints.
Yeah.
And those people will always exist, and that's just the way it is. But I don't know if they think of all of the people that they're, actually impacting by their plans.
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, a person is elderly and retires and downsizes, and then there's some assets and money that then goes to the kids and grandkids to help with college and help, like, it's not just a real estate investor that's going to lose maybe a little bit of profit. Yeah. That's not who you're talking about.
Yeah.
These are people that have lived in a home for 40 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
So yeah, but I mean, on the counter flip side of that too, I do think that homes need to be built, and I do think that all asset classes of homes need to be built, and I mean, it's not sustainable what happened over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
It's not sustainable, but I hope things that can level and then get back to just regular appreciation. That's healthy.
Yeah.
A big crash, I don't think does what people think it will do.
Right, or it's only going to be good for that one area that they're focusing on.
Yeah, and do you want to get into real estate if you just witnessed a massive, horrific crash? Yeah. That's what you want to do, because it won't happen to you.
Yeah.
Like, you want to get in low and then make your money, and then it'll never crash on you. Like, that's just not a healthy system. Yeah. Like, that's not the system we need.
Yeah.
Trust me, like, that's not, it's so short-sighted to think that you will wish that on a market that you're not currently participating in, but once you get in, it's going to be all great.
Right. Yeah.
That's not.
No, that's not how it goes.
That's not how it goes. Yeah, that's right.